Hello, and welcome to the Built to Be Human podcast, brought to you by the Functional Living Academy. I'm your host and guide, Liam Gallagher. So, as always on this podcast, um, I tend to talk about functional things. And today I've decided to broach the topic of what exactly does holistic wellness mean? What does it even look like? And why would I do it? Um, Holistic, when it comes to health and wellness, basically says that there's five parts, five components of health. There's physical, there's mental, there's emotional, there's energetic, and there's social. Now, there's a specific reason why I say energetic and not spiritual. Because I'm dealing with health and wellness, I choose to use the term energetic as opposed to spiritual, because spiritual is largely associated with some sort of religious context. And it's not that I'm opposed to that per se. It's that's not really the topic that I'm broaching. I'm broaching a functional physical topic. So we need energy to live. We need energy for most of our body's processes to actually take place. Everything from digestion to motivation to little things, the little hormone production and all of that takes some level of energy. This is basic chemistry at this point. So I speak in terms of energetics, mostly thinking in terms of like the acupuncture system, the meridian system of acupuncture, which describes a flow of energy and electromagnetic currents throughout our body. So when I talk about energetic, that's why I'm using that term specific. It's not a comment about spirituality whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I do my best not to really even broach that topic because that's for the individual to decide for themselves. So I talk a lot about um, dealing with the underlying issues that cause a malady or a situation that you're going through or that I'm going through in my life. And the reason why I talk about looking at things from the underlying perspective is instead of it allows me to deal with things more directly and more wholly than I would otherwise. So in my mind, it ends up being more of a dealing with the issue itself and dealing with the dynamics that go into it as opposed to putting a band-aid over the situation. One of the things that I tend to use as an example of this the most, there's two things that I tend to rely on to explain this to people. One is I'm a type 1 diabetic. And when I was diagnosed, I was in my early teenage years, and I was told that I had to be able to inject myself with insulin before I could leave the hospital. And the focus was solely on getting me to understand that I needed to take insulin, I needed to inject myself with it, and I needed to check my blood sugar in order to know how much insulin I needed to take. And they gave me all these formulas, all these equations, all these things to kind of decide how much insulin I'm going to take. Even down to if you're eating 10 grams of carb, you're going to need probably about a unit of insulin. Of course, that was when I first started. My insulin to carbohydrate ratio has definitely changed over the years, but it was very much a almost scientific, inhumane approach to the disease. I was being taught all of this information. Fortunately, I had the comprehension and the intelligence to really absorb it and to really begin to understand what it really meant. But there was absolutely nothing done for my mental health. There was nothing done at all for whether I was overwhelmed to the point that I didn't really have any motivation or any energy to do anything. There was nothing to help me with the social dynamic of it. There was nothing to help. The information I was given about what I should eat wasn't valid. So I'm given this disease. I'm told literally that it'll kill me if something doesn't beat it to me. And I'm told how to manage it from a modern medicine perspective. At no point in time was I ever uh, given any sort of counsel on how to handle the psychological ramifications. I was never given any sort of insight on how my blood sugar, whether it's high or low or in a good area, how that's very much going to affect my emotional well-being. I was never counseled on how my sugar and where it was at would affect my energy levels. So I was given one piece of the puzzle. And fortunately for me, I'm a very determined individual. And I had some experience earlier in my life that taught me that I really needed to take care of my thoughts, my emotions, my energy levels, my ability to socialize, as well as my physical well being. So I'm the one that added these additional parts. I'm the one who really took a step back from what I was taught and said, this is really nonsense. It's really only covering one area of my life. And even if I'm running decent numbers as far as my blood sugar is concerned, I might be an absolute wreck. So I decided, of course, I didn't really know what I was deciding when it happened. I was like 14 or 15 years old. I decided to take a step back and really start focusing on learning myself, learning what, if I have this emotional response, where I was at mentally that led me to that emotional response. And I've really started to know myself and my body. Of course, being a type 1 diabetic, it benefited me to no end because I could tell if I was getting anxious because my sugar was dropping or if I was getting anxious because something was stressing me out. Before doing this, I wasn't able to differentiate the two. So I would start getting stressed out and anxious, and I would be checking my blood sugar, trying to figure out if it was a sugar issue. At this point in my life, if I get stressed out and anxious, I know that it's stress and anxiety. If I'm getting stressed and anxious and I feel like my body's speeding up and my thoughts are racing and I'm starting to overheat, it's probably a sugar low. So again, but I took the time to see and observe how my body was responding, how I was responding mentally and emotionally to what was occurring, how it impacted my social life. When I was diagnosed, I was playing sports, and I was literally told, I was a goalie in soccer, and I was told by the refs that if I felt like I was having sugar issues, to just raise my hand and they'd stop the game and I'd be able to go over and check my blood sugar. Of course, I did it to the best of my ability, but I'm sitting there thinking, how the hell am I supposed to even know? I've just been diagnosed. How am I going to know that I'm having a sugar low? How am I going to predict this? And it was embarrassing. It was all of a sudden, you have 21 other people on the field with you as far as players. And if I raise my hand, the game stops. The game stops until I go and do what I have to do. So there was a tremendous amount of pressure on me, not just from a taking care of myself standpoint, but from a social standpoint. I didn't know how people were going to respond to this. It was basically a pseudo disability. I'm supposed to be in the prime of my life, or at least the prime of my youth. And I've had this thing that everybody now had to account for, combined with the fact that I didn't really have support with it at home. So I'm in this situation where I'm told that I have to deal with this disease. I've barely been given any sort of idea of how to actually deal with it other than give myself insulin shots. So I've spent 30 years learning what different foods do to me, what all these different specific things. But had I not taken those early steps in really observing and really taking myself away from the disease and start to instead of watching and observing myself filtered through the disease, I started to watch and observe myself based on who I am and what I recall feeling throughout the course of my life. So I think in terms of, if somebody's been given a disease, if somebody's producing a hormone and they're no longer producing the hormone, it's so critically important to address all of the issues involved, not just the deficiency. I've had somebody tell me at one point that they help a lot of people, a lot of women going through menopause and perimenopause, and that the mindset is to know themselves and to get these people to really understand who they are, what motivates them, and a couple other things. And I was a bit incredulous by this because I didn't understand how being deficient in something, a hormone in particular, how knowing yourself was going to correct how you feel physically as a result of that. Knowing yourself is definitely going to help your mental state. It's definitely going to help with your thoughts, and it's going to help with your emotional responses. But as far as actually taking care of what is now going on, it's really not going to at all. So I have to wonder at what point do people realize that their approach is nothing more than a band-aid and that they're really not directly addressing the issue. The other thing I like to use as an example of holistic versus traditional, or contemporary, I should say, because traditional is holistic, at least from a long-standing point of view, back when it was health and not medicine anyhow. The other thing is I have degenerative disc. With all the compression injuries I've had, with all the brain damage I've had, I have degenerative disc is one of the diagnoses I've had. To date, I have lost 2 discs entirely. I blew out C7, and then here recently, about just shy of 2 years ago now, I lost S1L5. So I do a lot of things that help to alleviate the chances of me having more discs go. Will I have another disc go? Chances are I will, but it's not because of lack of effort that it's going to happen. So I've got this degenerative disc diagnosis, and as a result, I have learned to pay attention to what I'm putting into my body as far as nutrients. I've paid attention to what sorts of activities I get into in a physical way, even at the gym. I'm pretty sure people know I'm at the gym as regularly as possible. But what I'm not sure of is if they know that it's not just for health or wellness that I'm doing it, but it's also to build my body in such a way that it's more able to handle the things that I've already been diagnosed with. So as I go to the gym, as I build muscle, supporting muscle more specifically, the more supporting muscle that I build around my spine, the less chance of spinal problems that I'm going to have going forward. Does it help my mental health? Of course it does. Does it help my emotional health? Of course it does. Does it help my social health? Of course it does. It also helps my energy levels. But the whole point is when I go to the gym, I'm taking specific nutrients to enhance what I'm doing physically. I'm also doing things physically that will enhance what my body's capable of. And oh, by the way, my approach is based on what I'm dealing with. So because I have degenerative disc, you will not see me loading my spine. There's, it's been a very long time since I've done any sort of squats or deadlifts. All my chest rows and chest exercises I do. I'm sorry, back. All my rows and all my back exercises I do chest supported. So again, I'm not loading my spine. Instead of doing squats and deadlifts, I'll use a belt squat because that belt sits on my waist and all the weight that I'm dealing with is from my waist down. There's no weight on my spine whatsoever. If I'm doing calves, I will sit in a machine that either puts the weight on my knees and I can lift use my calf muscles to lift my knees and the weight on my knees, or I'll sit and I'll push on something, but I will not get into a machine that the weight is sitting on my shoulders and I'm using my entire body to work out my calves, because with what I have going on, that's just silly and stupid. So do I go to the gym all the time? Do I work my back? Do I work my low back? Of course I do. I do modified kickbacks. I do the belt squat. I'll do kettlebell squats, on small weight. I'll even support myself with having a block where I cannot go below a certain height. So I'm not running the risk of pinching a disc or having my spine go into having my spine shift in a way that's actually damaging to what I'm doing. So I've got the nutrient component, I've got the physical component, which helps the mental component. I'm very disciplined. I go to the gym because I want to be in decent shape. And I also want to have the best chance at having a good A1C and my diabetes working well. And oh, by the way, it also helps me from alleviating the risks of another disc going, The more I strengthen, again, the more I strengthen those muscles, the more I'm able to keep my posture proper, the more everything is kept in line, kept tight, and there's less issues, less sliding around. Um, it's a comprehensive approach. I don't want to have to go through surgery. I don't want to be stuck in a wheelchair. I do not want to have to recover from a major setback again in my life. So I approach things from as comprehensive of a mindset as I possibly can. If I've got a cold, I'm not only going to eat chicken noodle soup. I'm not just going to drink some teas and give myself some herbs or other compounds that will help my body as it goes through what it's dealing with. I'm going to do all kinds of things, and I'm going to do them all at once. Another thing that I've done, I've done acupuncture a handful of times in my life, actually quite a few times. I spent 2 or 3 years straight doing it about once a week. But as I was laying there on the table with the acupuncture needles in my body, I also did deep breathing exercises. I also did visualization techniques. In other words, instead of doing one and then another and then another, I combined all the techniques all at once. It's no different when we're talking about holistic. It's no different than what I'm describing with type 1 diabetes and it being so important to not only pay attention to what's going into my body, but how I feel about it, how I feel mentally, how I feel emotionally. Stress can absolutely raise my blood sugar. Humidity can absolutely lower my blood sugar. So there's all these things that come into play. If I was just focusing on what I'm eating and how much insulin I'm putting into my body, I wouldn't do very well at all because there's so many other pieces to the puzzle that for lack of a better way of putting it, I'm completely and utterly ignoring. So that's why if somebody comes to me with a physical problem, I'm going to ask them how they're coping with it. I'm going to ask them, do you feel like this is stressing you out? Is this something that you're able to cope with easily? Because honestly, if I can help a person have some coping tools and some skills that help alleviate the stress that they're under, what they're dealing with their malady is going to improve. Their ability to handle it is going to improve. Their ability to do what they need to do as a result of is going to improve. So that's, to me, what holistic is. That's why I have a holistic approach to health and wellness. That's why I keep telling people, listen, I know tons of people who are at the gym all the time and they take good care of their physical body. Some of these people do absolutely nothing for their mental health. Some of them don't even do much for their diet. So I also know people who pay close attention to how they're feeling emotionally. They pay close attention to where they're at if they're overly stressed, and they spend all their time dealing with that, or even with spiritual issues, because that's where the spiritual comes in. They might pray all the time, they might meditate all the time, but they're not getting the movement that they're designed to have. So again, is it really benefiting us if we are not utilizing all the components at the same time, or at least I just lost the word, concurrently, at the same time? So again, if you're dealing with something physical, if you've got a physical diagnosis, fine. You're still going to have to deal with your mental health. You're still going to have to deal with your emotional health. You're still going to have to pay attention to your energetics. And you're still going to have to deal with the social consequences involved. If you have something mental going on, if you have a mental diagnosis, same thing. You're going to have to address the mental component to it. But if there's a mental component to it, let's say you're struggling with anxiety, there's very much an emotional component to it as well. And if there's an emotional component to it, you better believe that there's a physical component to it also. So again, obviously, if you've got anxiety, there's a social component. There's an energetic component. So holistic, when it comes to health, is really the only way that we're going to have a chance at being healthier than what we were before we began. If a person is telling you that you do not have to pay attention to all the components, they're trying to sell you something, and they're probably full of shit. So not sure how else to put it, guys. We need to take care of all components of our health at all times. If we find ourselves out of balance, bringing ourselves back into balance is what helps to maintain our health and what gives us the longevity that we are after. So, till next time, stay curious, stay healthy, be holistic, and take care of all parts of yourself, not just the one that's causing you the most issue at the moment. Till next time, have a great day.